My name's Steve Hatch, or Stephen Hatch, and I am from Salt Lake City, Utah. I am 54. I am also pseudoachondrodysplasia. So my history, it's a little different than a lot of other people. My biological mom died when I was two and a half, and so I don't know a lot about her. I grew up in Salt Lake City in a very, it was a Mormon area, a very religious area, and it's funny because I know my mother's church callings, but I have no clue what she liked to do. I don't know if she had a career at all, but I do know she was diabetic, and so I had some other siblings from her, and we were all premature, so she wasn't supposed to have children, and she did. So we were all about 2 months premature, and when she became pregnant with me, she just felt like she was supposed to have another boy, um, and I was born. And when I don't know how much, if you want me to talk more about the others, but when I was born, she really early on thought something was different and kept trying to talk to the doctors, and none of them would listen to her. And then eventually they were like, well, you're right, maybe he does have something. And it was in the 70s, it was 1970. So their medicine and the science was a little behind the ball, but they didn't know if I had a Down syndrome, if I had all kinds of different stuff. I don't know all the different diseases they thought. They thought a different type of dwarfism.
Sure.
They expected me to die, like that I wasn't going to live very long. And that's all I knew. And she, in 1970, being pseudo, it doesn't show. I mean, I'm telling this to people that know LPA and pseudos, but because it didn't show up, there was no reason to suspect that I had pseudoachondrodysplasia. So they started doing testing, and they did testing, about 1.5 years old, 2 years old is when they started this testing. And I know that the local geneticist, Dr. Carey in Salt Lake City, also worked with Dr. Ramon out of UCLA. And so they actually did blood work, and they sent the blood work to Dr. Ramon in UCLA. And that before they got the results back, my mother and me and my siblings were in a car accident, and that's where she was killed. So she never found out the return of the diagnosis. So she had no clue what it was. And up until that point, she was really depressed, and she was fighting. She was angry. She thought that her diabetes caused whatever I had. So she was kind of blaming herself for all that stuff. I don't know, a lot of the other details about that, but I do know that my dad had mentioned that she just always blamed herself, and he didn't think she would have ever moved past that. And so, I think that things happen for reasons. I was actually very fortunate or lucky. My father met someone else, and they married. So I had a stepmom when I was 4.5 years old, and she became my mom. I mean, that's who I call my mom. But she had 7 children, so it was a big family. And then my father and my stepmother had a child, Ruth Ann. So there's 11 kids, so it's pretty big. But I was originally the youngest in my family, and then I went to the middle. So, I think I've always been very opinionated. I've always been maybe spoiled, or I've always just, I've always gotten, things just always went my way. But so going from getting everything to going to the middle of the family, I knew that all of my siblings, we all had chores. We all had to do things around the house. We had to vacuum. We had to do the laundry, mow the lawns. And they just immediately didn't even use my size or my height as a reason to not do that. They made me do it. And I didn't realize how bizarre it was, but I didn't even have step stools around my house. There weren't step stools. We had bar stools, and I remember climbing a bar stool and then climbing onto the counter to reach just easy things like cups. We never put the cups down lower. So I'd ask for water, and I would be lazy sometimes, and my family was like, get on the stool, and just climb the stool. So that was my life. And I think I became active in LPA when I was about 10 or 11. It was the first LPA event I remember. And then I remember going to other little people's houses and seeing step stools. But really, I didn't have a step stool growing up until I remember in my 20s, I was sick of using the tub to brush my teeth sometimes because it was easier. And I was like, Mom, do you think maybe I could put some Rubbermaid stools like in the kitchen? I was like 20 something. So up until that point, I just always jumped and just did whatever. But I didn't think that that was not normal or usual. I just did what I had to do. And I think they instilled in that to me there, which is kind of opposite of what a lot of parents do now. But my parents basically said, Steve, the world's not going to change for you. You have to change for it. And the reality was basically that life can suck and that you need to figure out solutions. And so even if I couldn't reach something, we had a huge garage door with the little button, I don't know how tall, 6 feet tall maybe, and there was no way I could reach that. And I just remember having to figure out like broom handles or just different things to open up stuff. But I still do that. Like if there's a thing that I can't reach, I just have to figure out how to do it. But they instilled that into me really early on. With the chores, I remember trying to mow the lawn and I hit every sprinkler head in like a row. So that became the chore that I was not going to do from that point on. But I was stuck doing laundry. So I had to like fold clothes. I still had to do garbages. I still had to do some of the other chores. But yeah, they always just instilled independence to me. And I don't know, I've always wondered like genetically if my biological mother would have had the same thing. I know her mother actually spoiled me a lot. And so I remember after my biological mother passed away, her mother, my grandmother, moved to Utah from Maine to be across the street, to look after me or to take care of the kids. And I just remember at that time, I was probably 2.5, and I wasn't walking. Like I was adorable, so everybody just wanted to carry me, I guess. But my grandmother would just carry me, and she would never let me like just walk. And so I remember my father telling me he had very heated discussions with my grandmother that she was to not carry me at all anymore, and had to learn how to walk. And so he had really heated discussions with her that she was pissed off like throughout her whole life about those kind of things. And so I kind of wonder if my biological mother would have pampered me even more. And I think that maybe my whole experience growing up would have been different with that. And I can go back and forth and see DNA, like or genetics, some things I just don't comprehend with my stepmother or my mother. And I wonder if it's genetics, but I do wonder about DNA and being nurtured and the way that you're raised. And I feel like my parents overall did a great job of how they instilled in me independence early on. I mean, they tried to teach me I was just like anybody else. I could do anything I wanted to do. I played Little League baseball. I played Little League basketball. I just did whatever the neighbor kids did. And I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until I was in kindergarten when I started to realize my friends were getting taller than me. And then some of the older kids in the elementary school would start calling me midget or making names. That was the only time I started to recognize I was a little different, or that I was, maybe not quite like everyone else.
Sure.
So.
In school, what was the reception with the teachers?
So in my kindergarten, it was kind of a kindergarten school that was in its own building, so it was away from the other classes. And I don't know the discussions my parents had with the teachers, but I do know they treated me just like any of the other kids. I had an assigned desk. I may have had like a stool to put things on or to get to the drinking fountain, but I remember they would go on field trips and the whole class would walk, but I was always stuck with one of the other teachers and she drove me in her Jeep. So she would drive me to wherever we were going to the location on the field trip. And that's the only thing I recognized as being different. And then my first grade, the school was brand new. And so it was a brand new school, and it ended up, the door handles I couldn't open to get in. And I remember going into the bathrooms at one point and not being able to open up the bathroom door. So I think my teacher probably loved it because, like, I don't think they rushed to find me. So I think that they probably enjoyed that I wasn't disrupting their class the whole time. But eventually that changed, and they put the handles down lower so that I could open up the doors. But it was more to instill independence than somebody doing everything for me. That was about it. I don't know if this happened. I think there was a day early on in elementary school where the principal had an assembly and talked with the kids about me, but I was never told this. I was never aware of that growing up. But I do know that my classmates, my immediate friends, they always looked out for me. And as you progressed, it was usually just the youngest kids that were tripped out that I was a little person, and everybody else just treated me like I was just Steve. And so they didn't treat me any different. I've always been a smart ass, and I was one of those students that the teacher loved and hated me because I would comment about anything, and I was just a shit talker, and I would just I'd nonstop. And so I remember always being like that, and so I think my teachers probably loved and hated me at the same time. Right. But yeah, other than that, I did elementary school. I remember being afraid to go into middle school because I knew there were lockers in middle school. And just in my head, I had this vision that I would be shoved in the lockers, and that's where I would be. And it never happened. I think it happened because they did it for a yearbook picture. They asked me to pose in a locker. So I put myself in a locker. That was the only time it happened. But I had all these, fears of everything that would or could go wrong at school. And I think I also, about that time, did get a scooter, because it was getting a little harder to walk around the middle school and then at high school. So I do remember having that. But I got pretty quick of being embarrassed riding a scooter. And so I would, just have a backpack. And then I even got to a point where I was so bad at taking even books to classes because the backpack was too heavy. So I'm too cool to ride a scooter. I'm not going to ride the scooter. So I do remember that, just that kind of stuff. I didn't really notice problems, dwarfism related, until about being 12, about 12 years old. I went to the LPA convention in Reno way back when. I don't even remember the year, 82, maybe 82, 83. And I remember seeing other little people with different stages. And then we met Dr. Kopitz. My family was introduced by Dr. Ramon. Actually, he introduced my parents to Dr. Kopitz. And I found out I had scoliosis. And Dr. Kopitz at that time said, "Steve, you have really bad legs. You're bowing. You're gonna have to get them straightened, or else you will be paralyzed." And that was the first time I kind of even thought of medical differences. Mm-hmm. So I remember he told me not to carry stuff, but that time he got me the scooter to walk around, so I wasn't walking as much. And then I got a brace. I had to wear a back brace for years before surgeries, because nowadays they do those surgeries, I don't know how old the kids are, but when you're really young. Because he didn't know me when I was young, he had to wait until I was older to stop growing, or else whatever procedure he did would need to be redone. So he, so I basically waited until I was about 15, 16 years old. And then that's when I had my first surgeries back in Baltimore. But now,
what were those surgeries?
Man, they were a lot. I'm talking to the choir. Sorry, other little people watching this, but I was told that I didn't really my type of dwarfism. It's bone on bone. There's little cartilage. Your ligaments are really flexible, but there's not a lot of cartilage, and it's bone on bone. So your hip socket, instead of being like that, it would have worn down, and so I would have been paralyzed eventually. So the first surgery, I mean, there's so many better people that could answer that question for you, but I know that I had to go to Baltimore. I know my family was really kind of poor. We drove out there. We drove in a Volvo with no air conditioning from Salt Lake to Baltimore in the summer, and I remember going as soon as school got out so that I could have the first surgery. So I had a surgery on my right hip, and I woke up. It was the 12-hour long surgeries. It was those long surgeries. I woke up in a body cast from my belly button down, and then 2 weeks later, he did my left hip. 2 weeks later, he did my right knee. 2 weeks later, he did my left hip. So I was in there. That's like 2 months, roughly, in a hospital. It was a children's hospital in Baltimore at the time, and then I went home in a cast. So my dad, I actually remember, he made a platform. Basically, it was just a wood and a foam pad that became a bed in the back of the Volvo that I rode back home in. So, I just remember like needing help to use the restroom, but I remember I stared at a stupid ceiling of a Volvo without AC, like driving back to Utah, which is a 3-day trip. So I just remember that. I remember my dad would carry me into, wherever the room we were staying. But I remember that. And my family, as I said, I'm totally not religious now, but they were pretty religious. So I know my mom would make us listen to scriptures, or just like,
Sure.
It was the most boring shit like that I had to listen to for 3 days driving back to Salt Lake City. And I just remember like just tuning out and just trying to sleep as much as I could when we were driving. But I do remember that. I then was in Utah rehabbing. I remember my house had 2 levels, so a basement and then a main level. And I remember there would be times when the main TV was in the basement. So I would be down there and everybody was gone. My mom would go run an errand, and I would be in the basement, and I'd just be like, man, I'd be fucked if there was a fire. Because, like, I couldn't move. It was, like, the huge cast, and I was just kind of like, so those kind of thoughts would go through, of course, like a 16, 17-year-old, just like, wow, I would totally be doomed. But I did the rehab. A lot of you other little people are lucky because you had tutors. So, like, my mom made me go to school, like, even in the cast. So I had a wheelchair that laid flat. My dad made a little wood piece that I used as a desk to write on, and I was sent to school, like, even in rehabbing. And I just remember, like, laying on a wheelchair going to school. And I'm sure I didn't get the best grades, so I'm blaming it on that, even though it was probably just, I'm not the best student. But I remember going to school. I think I was back in Utah about 2 months with the cast for the bones to set. And then I had to go back to Baltimore to get the cast off. And I remember getting the cast off, doing physical therapy, having to learn how to walk again. I remember being like, I remember the first experience of getting your cast taken off and having even just a sheet touch my skin really hurt. Like, it really hurt a lot. And so you're just so sensitive, like, to anything that was touching you. So I remember that. I did the rehab. I had to start with the walker. I think I went to crutches, and I was supposed to get rid of crutches. And then I think the next time I saw Dr. Kopitz was about 7 months later, and I was still on crutches. And so it ended up my hips didn't work. The surgeries weren't as successful. He needed to go back in. So I ended up going back to Baltimore, did the one right hip, 2 weeks later did my left hip, went back in the body cast, did the same drive back to Baltimore and back to Salt Lake City, and then went back to school. And so I remember doing the same process, going back to Baltimore to get the cast taken off, doing the rehab, being out there about a month or so. And I remember at this point, my dad had used up pretty much all of his vacation. My mom, there were 11 kids, so she, she wasn't there. I was in the hospital by myself a lot of the time in Baltimore. And I remember Dr. Kopitz, this is what you don't see very often. Like, I remember in the middle of my therapy, he couldn't get my hip to flex as much as it should. He couldn't get it to bend 90 degrees. And I just remember him, one night he did exams. He had a bunch of other little people there, and he did an exam, and I was one of the last ones. And he ended up coming up to me, and he just started to cry. And he said, Steve, I'm sorry, but it didn't work. You're going to have to do another surgery. And so I had to do a third surgery on my left hip, went through the same process, back in the body cast, back to Salt Lake in the Volvo, and then doing the rehab all over again. And so I had to learn how to walk. I had to learn how to do all of that again. And I went through the same process. I went through where I had crutches and, the walker even before the crutches, but it seemed like I wasn't gonna walk without crutches. And I remember my high school basketball team, I was a sophomore, and the team, maybe sophomore, junior, about that time, but the basketball team, they looked out for me. And so I used my therapy became going to their basketball practices, but I would start walking without my crutches. And I made a bet with them that if they went to the state tournament, I would walk. And so I kind of felt obligated to walk. But I remember just walking 5 feet, and then 6 feet, then half court, and then the length of the court. And to distract myself, I would dribble a basketball just so I wasn't focusing on my legs. And I remember, even going to school, and my legs were really hurting, and I had shin splints all over. So just a little walking, it hurt a lot. And I didn't tell a lot of my classmates, but I would go early, and the soccer coach would meet me, and he would wrap my legs and tape them. And so I would have the athletic tape underneath my jeans, so nobody knew. And that's how I had made it through school without dying of trying to walk. But yeah, I remember they did stuff like that. They did, all kinds of things. I remember having, growing up Mormon, you go on a Mormon mission when you turn 19. So about 18 years old, you have to do certain things to go on a Mormon mission, like get your wisdom teeth out. They don't want people to be anywhere around the country and have dental problems, but also getting hardware out. So all the hardware that I'd had from my surgeries were still in my body. And my family, again, didn't have a lot of money. I remember my parents wrote a letter to Dr. Kopitz, basically just saying, we have a local friend that's a doctor. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He said he can do these surgeries. He'll take the pins out. And it was Dr. Callahan was his name. And he was in American Fork. He worked on all the football team, all the basketball team. Sure. He was a good orthopedic surgeon. But I remember him telling me, yeah, it'll take an hour-long surgery. We wrote that letter in a letter form, sent it to Dr. Kopitz, and said, just so you're aware, we're going to do this. If you have a problem with that, let us know. And he said, well, I made the tools that actually you're going to use to get those pins out. I custom made them. He doesn't even have anything that's going to work for that. So he sent his tools to Dr. Callahan in American Fork. It was the time when pagers were still a thing, and cell phones were just bricks, so very new. But he gave him his cell phone number, Dr. Callahan, and said, if you have any problems, just call me. So I remember graduating, and then within a couple of weeks, I went to go get these pins taken out. And it was, again, supposed to be an hour at the most. I woke up and it had been 6 or 7 hours, and the doctor was freaked out, and he couldn't get all the pins out. And he was like, Steve, I had a crowbar, and I was afraid I was going to shatter your bone. And he's like, so I left some in there. The ones I couldn't get out, I left them in. And in his mind, that was an okay thing. Your bones kind of grow over the pins, and They weren't interfering in my movement or anything like that. So I thought everything was fine. I went on a Mormon mission. I, I remember I was assigned a car because I didn't bike. And then that being said, I would end up hanging with the tall missionaries anyways on their bikes and doing, man, God, who knows what. Like my mom and parents would freak out if they knew. I mean, I would just ride almost on the handlebars, and we would just be in and out, weaving in and out of cars. And lived in projects. I lived on the border of Texas. I lived like all these places, but I had these amazing experiences. And then 2 years went by. I ended up going to a convention right after that, a Little People convention, and Dr. Kopitz saw an X-ray, and he saw the pin still in there, and he immediately he was really pissed. He was upset.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what's the big deal? Like, they're not in there. And he said, Steve, and this is why Dr. Kopitz is so unique. So when I was 17, he knew at that time I would need hip replacements. He saw the pins where they were. They were located exactly where your hip replacements need to go. He said, Stephen, you will have to have hip replacements. With those pins in there, that hip replacement's not even going to hold. There will be no solid bone to even hold those pins in. So he was furious that they didn't remove all the stuff. Dr. Callan had no reason to even think that far ahead, but that's just on a different level of how Dr. Kopitz was, where a lot of little people right now are experiencing surgeries and different procedures that I think he pioneered. And he knew what 30 years and 40 years down the road, what to expect from those things. And so I just remember having him take out my pins. And I remember him talking about my hip replacements, and that at some point I would need to have hip replacements in my 30s. And I thought 30s was a long time away, so I don't need to worry about that. And I just lived my life. I just did what I wanted to do. I did all kinds of stuff. I worked with legislators. I was an intern. I continued my love of basketball. I became friends with quite a few famous basketball players.
Like who?
I actually met Shaquille O'Neal while serving a mission. He went to high school in San Antonio, to Cole High, and the guy he calls his dad was his stepdad, was a drill sergeant at this Army base. And some Mormons knew him, and he was just graduating from high school when I met him. And so I met him the summer he was going to go play at LSU. And I just remember I was, even in the white shirt that you see Mormon missionaries, at a tie. He autographed my tie. I remember one of my companions was very religious and started giving him a Book of Mormon spill. And I was like rolling my eyes that like Shaq was getting this Book of Mormon spill. But he wanted us to sign our names on his Book of Mormon. So when it came to me, he's like, put Big Man by your name. And me having this love of basketball, even with my high school team, I just kept bugging him. So I would just go see him. He had no desire or interest in any of the religion, and I just was like blown away. I mean, he was really big then as a senior. And so right after my mission, he went pro. And so anytime he would come to Salt Lake, I would meet up with him. He introduced me to, all of his teammates. He was on the second Dream Team. He introduced me to almost all of those guys. So I got to know Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen, Reggie Miller, Mitch Richmond, like all of these guys. And I actually loved meeting all these players. So I went to my college and I said, I want to be a sports writer. There's no way you guys are going to get the stories that I'm going to get. I went and hung with these guys at this bar last night, and I was like, there's no way that you will have these stories. And so I became a sports writer, and it was actually the perfect time if you were a Utah Jazz time. It was when they went to the finals. And so I was a sports writer. I became friends with Karl Malone, John Stockton, all these other people. And then, of course, Michael Jordan, I hate you still because you just are so damn good. That's what I hate about you. But I was at all those games, like all the final games I got to go to. seeing them in the lockers, meeting them. And it was really interesting being a news reporter because all of a sudden, some of the other local newspapers hated me because I was getting the interviews they wanted and the players were treating me nice. I remember, if you look in history, there was a basketball player that played in Detroit in the 80s named Rick Mahorn. Actually, he's Marty, actually. Marty Clever is actually one of his friends. But he was known as one of Detroit's bad boys. So he would be put into games to injure players and do stuff. And I remember Grant Hill was playing for the Detroit Pistons, and I went to interview him, and all of these reporters were around, and there wasn't really room, and I just happened to stand there, and Rick Mayhorn moved everybody out of my way and was like, "Here you go, little man." And like he was making sure that I had the perfect spot to get my little recording of whatever interviews were being asked. So I remember that, but they all just looked out for me. I remember John Stockton coming up to me, and he was a family man. So all of his kids would be at the games, and they would all be tripped out, this little person. And they would just constantly come and talk with me, and they were just really exciting kids. And he was embarrassed by that. And he came up to me, and he was like, "Steve, if they ever get out of line, I want to know. I want to know. They can't do that." And so I actually made the statement to him, and I was realizing my role as a little person is to also make it easier for the next little person in life. And so I knew by just letting them ask me whatever questions, the next little person they met, it wasn't going to be as big of a deal. And so I actually became friends with a lot of his kids and a lot of these players and a lot of their kids. And Karl Malone actually said his one son, KJ, kept asking why I couldn't go over to their house for a play date. So, so there's always stories like that. But the other reporters got to a point where they just didn't like that. And so my living as a reporter was 2 years. I have just dozens and dozens of amazing stories with basketball players. It's funny hearing from friends of mine that oversaw some of these. I remember when the Dream Team, they actually played in Salt Lake City as an exhibition game. And I had hung out with Charles Barkley and all those guys the night before. And at the game, he came up to me at halftime, and we were just talking, and he's like, "Are you going to come hang out with us tonight?" And he was telling me where to meet him. I'm like, "I don't know." I was a Mormon kid. I didn't even drink. So I would go to these places to chaperone them. But, man, I was mostly just in awe of, like, these amazing basketball players. So I have friends who saw me that were in the nosebleed section sitting at half court talking with Charles Barkley. And they were just like, "What the hell?" Like, they were laughing. You were laughing. What were you talking about? And so, like, I just have more random stories of what other people saw me than even my own experience of living it. I had a really big story, and it was with Rudy Tomjanovich, who was the coach of the Rockets at one point. Mm-hmm. It was him or Del Harris. I can't remember the two, but they were friends with Billy Barty. And Billy Barty, I didn't realize, played basketball.
Yes.
And was it high school or college? College, I thought.
LACC.
Oh,
So they knew him very well, and so they would talk with me about him playing basketball, and I was just doing the best to be walking, let alone like be very athletic. But I just remember them talking about how much they loved Billy Barty, and I'm pretty sure it was Rudy Tomjanovich. And Rudy Tomjanovich had an interesting story. I didn't realize his career ended because he was in a game once, and there was a fight that broke out, and he went up to intervene, and his whole face was shattered, and that ended his career. And so he was just a badass. But it was just incredible, like some of these people I met. Bill Walton, it was amazing watching some of the NBA finals, sitting this close to Bill Walton in a back room, just mumbling about like the plays and what you wouldn't say on air. But just those kind of people. It was really amazing. The Jazz Bear at one point became friends with me and wanted me to be the little bear. I was the first little mascot that I know of. John Apsey was the Bears' name, and he was the first person to instill that, at least in an NBA team.
Yeah.
And so then there were quite a few after that. But yeah, John approached me and I did the little bear. I was the shittiest like mascot. I was barely mobile, so I'd kind of hobble around. But I loved basketball, and that love continued. I mean, it continues still. But are we still recording? Because I don't know.
We're still rolling.
Ah, damn it. Okay, because I don't want some of these stories are just incredible. So I also did meeting with legislators. I worked in the state capitol. I would walk wherever I wanted to walk at the capitol. I got to know really powerful people in Utah. Then I met Kate. Like the governor, like the Speaker of the House, like the President of the Senate, like all those guys. So in the whips, the leadership of the state legislature. So I knew them, and then even the people that would come to the governor's office were like John Huntsman, different people that were very influential. I don't remember most of them, but they would remember me because I stood out. And so I did that, and I actually ran for city council. I ran for city council about the time I started talking with Kate Masterson, and I lost. I lost a primary election by 7 votes, and because I lost, there happened to be a regional in Detroit that I wouldn't have gone to if I had won, and I went to the Detroit regional, and I made a point to actually just spend most of that time with Katie. So that's where I met Katie, and we started to talk, and we formed a relationship, a friendship at that point. I then moved to Chicago. I lived in Chicago for a year, and then I was like, I'm gonna move back to Salt Lake. For you Chicago people, you guys are tough because honestly, that snow sucks. And the snow sucks. Where I lived, there was no parking, so it's like you were fighting for parking spots. I couldn't walk that far. Most of the L's did not have elevators, and then the elevators wouldn't even work. So I didn't even ride the L at all in Chicago. I would pay $50 to drive anywhere and park my car for an hour, or I would take cabs and still pay $50. So I hated it, and it hurt my legs. So I knew that my body felt more sore in Chicago. So I lasted almost a year to the date, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to school in Salt Lake. I'm gonna try to finish my degree, and I moved back to Salt Lake, enrolled in school, and then Kate moved out like a few months later, and then her and I were trying to figure out what we wanted to do, and that's when we started taking business classes. And we enrolled to do a business course. So we did that. It was a 6 or 8 week course, and we decided to open up a chocolate shop. And that kind of came from a bunch of different things. My grandmother had dipped chocolates all of her life. She would come to our home in the holidays and dip chocolates. We'd give them to friends and family. And my dad divorced my stepmother when I was in high school and college. And so he was bored. So he turned his basement into a kitchen. He would dip chocolates and he would sell them at boutiques. And I remember I would be stuck and roped in to go sample chocolates. And so I would do that. I also during that time have given all these basketball players Scottie Pippen chocolates. Shaq, I would always take fudge. And I don't even know if any of them ate it. But I remember going to a game once as a reporter, and I didn't have any chocolate. And Scottie Pippen came up to me and he's like, "Did you bring any fudge?" And he was like, "Because we're going to play poker on the plane to Vegas tonight." Because it was like an all-star weekend. And I was like, I did not bring fudge. And so I didn't even watch that game. So I ended up going to get fudge to go give to Scottie Pippen so that he could have candy. So this was in 1999 to 2000-ish, 2001. I don't remember exactly which year it was, but yeah, I remember that. And then Katie, as I had met her, her family owned restaurants in Chicago. So she had worked at a restaurant her whole life. She had gone to pastry school just she was trying to do something different than just working at the restaurant. So her knowledge of that, she had the pastry background. She moved to Salt Lake. She started working with my dad, dipping chocolates and learning how to do the chocolates. And her and I were like, well, let's just open something. And I was dumb and just like, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I loved people. I talked. I loved chocolate. I ate shit. I just had fun, but I didn't have like this destination of what I wanted my career to be. But I knew that I liked Katie. I knew that I also wanted to help her. And at one point, she wanted to open up a bakery. And I was like, well, let's just combine the bakery and chocolates and then do both. And so we did that. In 2003, we opened up a small shop in Salt Lake City. And yeah, we opened up a shop. I remember it was a lot of work. We didn't have any money. We started with a $20,000 credit card balance transfer for 5.99% APR for the life of the thing. So that's what we started with. We took that credit card offer. The bank then also matched it. So we made it to like $45,000 is what we started our business with. I remember the first day we were open, Kate and I didn't think we were ready, and my father was there helping it, and he's like, just put up a sign, put up a sign. So we put up a sign. I remember we sat there most of the day from 10 a.m. and about noon or 1, somebody came in, and our first customer was this 5-year-old kid that had a backpack on, and the school was just 200 feet down from the shop. It was really close to where our chocolate shop was. And this kid came in, and we had spent all this time making all these chocolates. All he wanted was a Coke. So that was our first customer, was a Coca-Cola. Some kid, wherever you are, you're now like 20 something. So maybe find me so I can find out who you were. But he wanted a Coca-Cola. I remember that night, like we'd worked almost 12 hours, so 10 to 10, and we made $180 or $188, something like that. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is so amazing. We made $188. Like, so if you like even divide that by how many hours we were there, like it was shit. So I mean, it was probably way less than minimum. But I was kind of like, how cool is this? Like, without what we created, like we wouldn't have made that $188. So like in my mind, I was so proud of that, like $188 that we started with. And yeah, I loved it. Like the neighborhood became very supportive of Kate and I. They took us under their wings, so they would always look out for us. And I know that we would have customers come in to look at the midgets running a chocolate shop, but that joke wouldn't last very long. So they may come in, for the first visit for that, but then if our food sucked, they wouldn't come back. And so it did bring in people, but it just was. We just became popular, and it was just by the way, they're little people. So some customers had no clue it was even our shop, and it was interesting to see how they would treat us. So there were times when they would completely ignore Kate and I and talk to my dad, or talk to any employee that was taller than us, it must be their shop. These little people don't know what the fuck they're doing. Like, they're little people. They're special. They can't do stuff like that. Like, whatever people think of little people, so they would not know it's our shop, and they would treat us like shit. And then eventually they may figure out it's our shop, but by then we're kind of done. So it's like, you kind of missed your opportunity. So it's, for the most part, it was just, we're a chocolate shop, and we happen to be little people. We ran the shop for quite a few years. We actually, in 2008, the economy was kind of crazy, and I remember we were approached by a producer to do a TV show, and they wanted to do a show on Kate and I, and they approached us because one of the producers had been a news anchor in Salt Lake City and had covered our chocolate shop. And so they were looking at new ideas for reality shows, and Little People, Big World was huge. The Little Couple was pretty big, but The Cake Boss was big. So this reporter just said, I know of some little people that run a chocolate shop. And they approached us, and at first we honestly said no. Like we were sick of the little people shows ourselves. Like we just were kind of bored with it. And then we thought about it, and business was hard. Like, so it was really struggling. So we agreed and said yes. And so we ended up doing a show. They filmed 10 to 12 episodes. They filmed the show, and it was really interesting because we couldn't choose what we were doing, so we could restrict certain things. Like I didn't want them to ever see the outside of our house because I didn't want people to find out where we lived.
Sure.
So for security reasons, I didn't want that, they basically made us a Cake Boss, but with chocolate. So we would make these really huge, elaborate things, and they would have a crew, and there would be 100 people and us working on these big projects, and it would take a week to film an episode. And I just remember these episodes were really huge, but every step was directed by a producer or an administrator sitting in DC and in New York, and they would be like, can they make that flower red? Can they make this blue? Can they make it bigger? Can they do that? So every step you were told kind of what project we were doing. We would see the Cake Boss make a pool table, and then they'd be like, hey, can you guys make a chocolate pool table? And we would just be like, that's fucking original. Like, that's a great, yeah, like that's really good. But everybody thinks you make so much money in doing a reality show. I think that is true, you can, but to start with, you don't get shit. Like they don't owe you anything, and you have no say, and so you're kind of dictated what you would do. All of the terms had to be pre-negotiated. So when it was a show to do it, Kate and I, they wanted the logo of our store to become their property. They wanted our images to become their property. And Kate and I were like, no, we were already Hatch Family Chocolates before we were ever approached to do the show. You're welcome to use our logo, but like we're not giving you that right. We had to determine, like we had to sign papers if we ever opened up a second location, a percentage of sales would go to them. If we created a cookbook, a percentage of sales would go to them. So we had to think, long term of what we really wanted to do. And we weren't going to give an inch on some of the stuff, but you didn't have a say of what you're going to film. And Kate and I also knew that TV, whatever you became on TV also was real. So if you were mean to people, even if you think you are acting, that's what people think you are. You're going to be that asshole that's a dick. Even if that's a persona that you created just for a show, that's what your other people's realities become of you. So we did that show. As I said, I was very careful about like how we were portrayed, just all of that. We were really careful. We did learn from other people. We learned that your mics are always recording, and that became property of TLC. So if you talked about anything private, your skeletons, anything, they could overhear that. So I immediately got to where any phone call that came in, I immediately undid the battery pack, took the mic off, and I left the building. And I would walk somewhere just to talk. But any footage could be used. You didn't have any say about that. But it was hard, but it was a chance of a lifetime. We got to make really incredible projects and really incredible things. We couldn't decide what they were, but we got to make sorry, I'm standing up, but chess sets where the pieces were this tall, and so they were all chocolate, and we got to make crazy things like that you just normally wouldn't make, and what a ride! That was an experience to do, and then we weren't dramatic enough, and so we lasted one season, and they don't cancel you they never call you and say you're done. It's just, we're gonna remove you from the schedule. And so I just remember being all right, you could do that. At the same time we were getting that, Karl Malone was calling us and he was like, Steve, I'm being enshrined into the Hall of Fame. If you guys want to bring the film crew to come watch, like, you can come, we will give you that background access to, so we were invited to the Hall of Fame. It was also the same year that the '92 Dream Team was inducted to the Hall of Fame. Bobby Hurley's, like, one of the Hurleys was inducted also. Scottie Pippen was inducted, and Karl Malone. And I remember the people that called us from the Hall of Fame, they were like, Steve, Karl has a really short list of people he's invited, and he wants you and Katie to come out here. And so we did, and it was just an amazing experience. But I was just kind of like, you canceled us because we were fucking boring, and like, you could be here right now with these basketball players and see that we're more than just like a circus thing. And like, yeah, I mean, I've never seen that on like Little People Big World or a dinner on Little Couple. I was like, you could see us actually mingling with all these like the best basketball players to ever play a game of basketball, and you don't want to cover that. So like, they didn't cover that, but I remember just like, it was one of the coolest experiences. It was also really interesting because Karl Malone had 7 siblings, and they made a statement, and it didn't make sense to me at first, and then as I thought about it, it did. But Karl had 7 siblings. During his professional career of playing basketball, he'd bought all of those people houses, all of them cars, all of them different things. When he was invited to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, he asked his siblings to actually pay for that themselves. So to pay for the trip, Kate and I paid for ourselves to like go see him inducted into the Hall of Fame. There was 2 siblings out of 7 that showed up, and you know, he'd given them every fucking thing, like their whole life, and it kind of hurt you that like his own family didn't even support him on that. And so I know a lot of people have opinions of him, but he had the greatest heart, and he always looked out for Kate and I, and he was really good. In fact, we named one of our products at the chocolate shop after him. It's a Caramel Malone Crispy is what we named after him. But he was just amazing to us and just really incredible. But yeah, we had all those experiences. We decided our small shop was too small. We bought an old building and renovated it. We went through like all that process. We took out a loan for $1.8 million, and then we did the construction. It took about 1.5 years to find tenants, and then we almost went bankrupt. So we couldn't get people coming in. We almost went bankrupt. Kate and I were like kind of going our different ways. I'd always wanted children. She never did, and she always told me this. So as our business was getting harder and harder, I was like, Katie, what the fuck am I doing this for? Like, you know, when I'm dead, what's left? You know, I don't have a kid. This is just a business. It's a shop. And so those differences became bigger issues and bigger issues. So we went through a divorce, and my whole time was like, man, this would make for some pretty fucking amazing TV. But at the same time, I was really glad that we were private, and we got to experience that all through, you know, our own, on our terms and our own privacy. But yeah, it's been great. Kate and I, we are great friends now. We just weren't great spouses. So we're almost like, she will always be my family. But yeah, we continued the shop. We stuck it out. We've now been open about 22 years, a little over 22 years, running a business. It's a lot of work and a lot of fun.
You said tenants. There's other tenants in your building?
So when we bought this building originally, yeah, there's other people and we're in the middle of a neighborhood, and it's a unique neighborhood in Salt Lake City. It's the most diverse neighborhood. It's very liberal. It's right in the middle of downtown, but it's a neighborhood. There's basketball players, there's Utah Symphony members, there's artists, there's doctors, there's bank presidents, there's attorneys, there's a poor college kid, there's a hippie, there's like all these different people in the same neighborhood. So it's a really unique place. And so when we found an old grocery store that the owner had passed away, and it was right by this park in the middle of the avenues is this neighborhood. And we renovated the building. We kind of figured out what we wanted to put in there, but it took forever to get the right tenant to come in. And by the right tenant is there were other restaurants that wanted to come, but they weren't the right fit for what Kate and I wanted to create in that neighborhood. We wanted a sit-down place. We wanted like a place for not just fast food. We wanted something that would be appropriate. There were other, there was Tibetan restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants, Indian restaurants. So there were in the same neighborhood, and there would be restaurants like that would approach us, and we didn't want to put them under. So like we didn't want to put all these other neighbors under. So we were probably the first business people that were like turning people down to rent your space because we didn't feel it felt right. And then it ended up, Kate's brother ended up partnering and bought the building. And otherwise, I mean, we would have lost everything. We were 12 hours away from an auction, foreclosure. The community knew that we were struggling, and they kind of supported us even more. Like they didn't want us to quit, and they loved what we created. And I don't think many of them think of us as little people anymore. We're just Kate and Steve. So there will be kids that will come into our shop, and then we'll have friends that are little people that come in. And I remember this 4-year-old kid just came in, and he was just barely 4, and he saw our little people friends, and he was just staring at them. And he was just like, I was standing eye to eye to this 4-year-old. He's like, Steve, they are short. And I was like, dude, I am fucking short. Like, I'm like saying eye to eye to this 4-year-old. And he was like, yeah, whatever, but Steve, they're really short. And I was like, so that is the reality of what we create, is we created a space where thousands of kids, hundreds of kids through your years are like just meeting a little person that we just become Steve and Kate that own a chocolate shop. That's the gimmick. It's not like there's this, we're not dressed as hobbits all the time. We're not, like, we're just happen to be little people. And yeah, it's a really amazing thing. We make amazing product. But we provide a place for people to come and forget about all the shit and all the stress that's going on in the world. Nothing else matters, but the products we make, the chocolates we make, the ice cream we have, the hot chocolates, the pastries, all of those are to give a mood and an environment to the neighborhood. And the mood is, just the warm, fuzzy feeling. We want you to forget everything else that's going on in life. For 10 minutes, none of that matters. So the chocolates are just a way to sell that emotion. That's what we sell. We sell that feeling, that emotion. The chocolates just happen to give people that emotion. So it becomes, I don't know, an intimate feeling for them to have that connection with us. We become their family. They're pretty protective of us. And we have anybody and everybody that comes in, like all kinds of people, like still legislators, still politicians, still all kinds of people that come into the shop.
So what are your plans going forward?
The older I get, Jim, the more I'm learning that being patient's really important, but also to try to live in the now. I think we get so caught up in like the what ifs and what we may want to do that we're not enjoying just the moment. And I think that, man, I eat chocolate and shit all day long. I get to meet amazing people. I have the greatest job in the world, and so I don't know how I can top that. I think that moving forward, it's Matthew McConaughey said it once, and he talked about how somebody asked him who his hero was, and he said, "Can I get back to you in just a few months?" And the guy ran into him later, and he said, "So have you figured out who your hero is?" He's like, "Yeah, it's me in 5 years. That's who my hero is. It's me in 5 years." And 5 years went by. That same person came up to him and said, "So have you met your hero?" He's like, "No, man, I'm not even close." And he's like, "Now it's me in another 10 years." And so, but the lesson in that is that life is about learning and always trying to improve yourself and always trying to become better. So looking at what my future is, I don't have like it all spelled out. I don't have this vision board of day to day exactly what I want to be. I just want to keep getting better and keep learning. and I also know that learning from other people is really important. I love what you're doing because honestly, I think this is valuable. Like, I love looking back at other people's stories. Um, it was really important to me when we were struggling as a business to be like, what the fuck am I doing this for? Why am I here? Um, you don't learn from successes. You're never going to learn if life is so easy. You won't learn anything. You're learning when you struggle. When I look at every successful person, and you name it, you can research them, they all struggled. Everybody's been in that same exact boat. We're so afraid of image now, and social media and Instagram and TikTok, we're trying to portray this image that we're all perfect. That's bullshit, and it's a mirage. Like, we all struggle, we all have fears, we all have emotions. Nothing's easy, and that's okay. And it's also good to learn and to keep like struggling and you know keep putting yourself in those places. Basketball player will say that if you're the best basketball player on the court, you need to change courts. And so like you're always playing with somebody better so that you're improving and trying to get better. But as far as my goals, man, I may do this until I die. Who knows? Like I really love what Kate and I created. And I don't know if it will remain the same. I don't know how it will evolve. But yeah, I don't care. I'm having a blast. I have a great life. So.
Anything you want to add?
I am in a weird position. Everybody kind of knows I have an average height sister that's my half sister Ruth Ann that ended up having an ACON child, so it's a fluke. Ruth Ann's average height, she's not little. It's 1 in 50,000 births or whatever. So I have a niece that is an ACON, and it's, I'm doing this I think for her now. Like I'm kind of. I don't need any recognition. I don't need anything, but I want her to have like the greatest life she can have. But I also want her to know that she can do whatever the fuck she wants. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't care what you want to do in life. We can do anything. We may need stools or or reachers to do it, but honestly, we really can do everything that we want. On our wall in our chocolate shop, we have pictures. And we have pictures of, a lot of pretty powerful people. There's a picture with Kate and I and President Obama. There's a picture with me and President Biden. There's pictures with me and Shaq, with me and Karl Malone, Kate and Karl Malone. There's like all of these different people on the wall. And I've told Brooklyn to look at the wall. She asked me some days, how do you do it? Like some days it's just hard. And you get people that will point fingers at you or say things. For the most part, I don't really even hear it anymore or see it anymore. I've just kind of tuned it out. But I told Brooklyn to look at our wall. And it's even a lesson for myself that I've had a very amazing life. And a lot of those people I would have never have touched shoulders with had I not have been little. Maybe I would have met them, but I don't think so. And I would have definitely not have become friends with them. I wouldn't have had like longer term relationships with these people that are just incredible people. Had I have not been little, had my biological mother lived, I don't know if I would have been the same person that I am now. Maybe I would have never have opened up a chocolate shop. I don't know. And I just feel like so fortunate to be where I'm at. Man, I just want to keep learning. And enjoy the present, man. Enjoy the now. Tomorrow's never guaranteed. You have no clue what it's going to be, and you just enjoy the ride. Have a blast.
I would think so.
Maybe go out burning, like just go out in a big flame, so like don't be. I think there's those little people out there that you guys are a bunch of pussies. Sorry, a bunch of wusses because you're so afraid of getting hurt or getting like stepped on that you're not even gonna live. You're not gonna like try to ride a motorcycle with somebody because you're gonna injure yourself, or you're not gonna go skiing, or you're not gonna man, you're missing out on life. Like, go out in a blaze of glory and go skydiving. If you kick it, it'll be pretty fast. But I mean, just live life. Like, life is so short. No pun intended, but it is. Like, just live and do whatever you want. Like, enjoy life.